Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I am absolutely delighted to be here today talking to you about some of my very latest research. It's called Future Tech 2024. And what I'm doing in this research is taking a longer view on what the telecoms world is going to look like from a technology and services perspective 10 years out. I'm drawing on my own background in the R&D sector. Many of you know me as a telecom analyst, but what you may not have realized is that I've done a lot of work with research labs like CSIRO over the years. In fact, I was on one of their advisory boards for close to 6 years as part of the CENTI project, where 10 years ago we deployed the first gigabit network in Australia, doing things like virtual critical care services, remote surgery between Katoomba and Sydney-based hospitals using telecommunications networks. This is something that I really love, talking to people in the research labs and in the vendor labs and those who think very deeply about the direction of services. So what I'm doing in my Future Tech series is conducting extensive interviews with people who also are deep thinkers about the future. Some of the people that I've talked to are pictured here. Some of you know them. John Lindsay, who's been a CTO at companies like Internote and iNet. Narelle Clark, who has a background of working in Optus and CSIRO. She's the deputy CEO of ACAN and also the long-standing president of the Internet Society in Australia. Dr. Dean Economou, a researcher at NICTA and formerly at CSIRO. Christine Ekman, who's one of the co-founders of Mobile Pulse, a mobile analytics company, and very heavily involved in the venture capital and startup world in the United States. Dr. Paul Brooks, who many of you also know, who's leading many of the standards work in the Comms Alliance, as well as his own consultancy. And Steve Harley, who's the Chief Product Officer at iNet. And we've talked about some of the innovations that they're doing. This is just the beginning. So, in thinking about the future, one of the things that I have to ask is what's happened over the last 10 years? And I would say there are 3 really big trends. The first happened in about 2007 when Apple introduced the iPhone. Announced in January, launched in about June. It really changed the face of telecommunications. And it wasn't just the iPhone, it was the App Store and the ecosystem that evolved around that. And that has changed the face of our industry ever since. It's not just mobile networks, though, because without the fixed networks, the mobile networks don't work very well either. Fixed networks have grown drastically in speed and ubiquity. 10 years ago, we were still just emerging out of the dial-up stages. Today, we're talking about connections in the hundreds of megabits and even gigabits. The other major trend, of course, is the rise of social networks. And this is something that's going to very heavily impact the future as well. If I look at the next 10 years, the thing that I see are 3 interlocking trends. And as I talk to you today, I'd like you to think about these 3 trends because it's hard to separate them. The first of the trends is new devices equal new opportunities. And I'll be showing you some of these new opportunities for the telecom sector. The second major trend is that everything is going to be connected and it's going to impact our daily lives in ways that are completely unanticipated. And the third trend is privacy. Will it be gone forever? And there are some pretty scary implications here. So the first thing I'd like to show you are some of the new devices. These are some pictures from the Computer Electronics Show, CES. If we look on the left, what we see is a modular design from Motorola. It's their Project Era. This division actually was acquired by Google some time ago, and it's designed to allow people to pretty much pick and choose exactly what kind of modules are going to be in their smartphones or tablets. The implications for this go beyond just these prototypes that we see here, because it could lead to all kinds of new devices that are just assembled to do different things aside from just being a smartphone. Another concept is shown in the Corning picture where you've got this tablet-like device that's actually communicating with a larger wall screen. The integration of tablets and smartphones with other displays is work that still needs to be done. The idea of being able to actually display things on walls without any kind of screen is also quite fascinating. In the lower left side, what we see is another concept device that uses bendable, foldable screen technology, essentially allowing you to roll up the screen into something the size of a wand. This has profound implications because it means that these gadgets that we carry around can have completely different form factors than we have today and will be much smaller and bulkier to carry around, perhaps the size of a pen or even smaller. Another concept that is shown here on the far right is augmented reality on a totally translucent display. I'll say a little bit about augmented reality in a few minutes, but it's another one of these issues or technologies that has a lot of potential to impact the kinds of services that are rolled out. Audio interfaces, I think, are going to play another very large role in the future. Right now, they're still very embryonic, not always so good at picking up commands. Siri is probably the most well-known. Windows has its own version called Cortana. I think we'll be seeing a lot more of this as well. Wearable technology is something that we've seen a lot of in the news. Frankly, a lot of it is just a point solution and not all that interesting just yet. Yet to see anything that really has a wow factor. In terms of telecommunication services, these devices aren't using their own SIM cards. So they're not going to generate new revenue by new SIM cards, but what they are going to do is generate more traffic over your existing smartphones. For the most part, these kinds of devices use Bluetooth to communicate with a smartphone. In some cases, they use Wi-Fi. Categories in this area include smartwatches, most of which are pretty bulky. Some, not pictured here, are getting sleeker and more interesting, more like jewelry. The one in orange, the Pebble smartwatch, is actually quite interesting because it has its own app store, and there are applications that are being developed that let you actually run it on the smartwatch. What these kinds of devices are doing is allowing you to interface with your smartphone without actually having to hold the gadget in your hands. Another category of smart device has to do with activity monitors and health and fitness, and I've shown a couple of them here. They're point solutions, not really mainstream just yet. There are also some biometric sensors, things that help you to do away with trying to remember passwords. And on the bottom right, there's something called Smarty Ring, which is actually a pretty cool little device that has a lot of the same functions as the smartwatches, but it also has this little function that tells you when you're more than 100 feet away from your phone so that you don't actually walk out and forget it, which a lot of people tend to do. I saw this last week. And at first glance, I thought, wow, Telstra's actually launched something really cool. You know, they've come up with a wearable device for pets. And then I read a little bit closer and saw it was slobber resistant. I thought, oh, cute ad. Read a little bit closer and saw that it had bark-to-text communication capabilities, and I realized, hang on, it's April Fool's. They've put a joke on us. I think I can safely predict that we are not going to see a bark-to-text application in the next 10 years. However, the concept of having some kind of wearable device that allows you to find your pet, or maybe even an implantable or ingestible device, I think has some legs. People love their animals. They're part of the family. Today, we have RFID chips that are put into our dogs and cats, but they don't allow us to locate our animal if it disappears. We have to rely on someone else taking that animal to a vet or some other location to be able to, find out where our pet is. This is something that I think has a potential in the industry. And by the way, it could also be used for things like having a bracelet where you've got, let's say, an elderly person who might have dementia or Alzheimer's, and you don't want them wandering away and you want to be able to find them. So potential applications there. Some of the other wearable devices that are becoming available have a little bit of a scary side to them in terms of privacy implications. The device in the middle top is an always-on camera that literally lets you take pictures every couple of seconds, recording everything around you and uploading your life as you sort of make your way through the day. The problem with something like that is that you're taking pictures of people and they don't necessarily know it. You don't necessarily know where you are when you're taking these pictures. It might be in totally inappropriate places. Most of you have probably heard a lot about Google Glasses and the fact that it's got built-in video and cameras, and people are quite concerned about some of the privacy implications. However, you can see that somebody's wearing these gadgets and perhaps take evasive action. Police are using wearable technologies to do recording of different incidents, and certainly there's a role for this in the world of, the law enforcement world. But there are also potential privacy implications. There are smart shirts that monitor all kinds of health signals. Again, it can have huge benefits, but if the information is improperly used or intercepted, there can be huge privacy implications. And then we have the whole category of either wearable or implantable or ingestible healthcare devices and privacy implications there, as well as potential hacking vectors, and I'll talk about that a bit more in a moment. Augmented reality is something interesting. These are some screenshots from a company called Laster that has a product called see-through glasses. Unlike Google Glass, this particular product was designed not to have a camera and not to have any kind of video, specifically to protect against privacy. It communicates with your phone and uses the GPS from your phone. It uses the communication signals from your phone. And then it has software that allows you to basically automatically take what you're looking at and impose an augmented view. A couple of the applications already available, including a sailing application where it can give you all kinds of information about the water conditions and the direction that you're heading. Obviously, driving information, giving you your GPS type of information and your navigation without having to look down at your car console. And the last one on the bottom left is looking at paragliding and helping you understand things like altitude and wind direction and so on. Some interesting things here, and I think room for more applications. These kinds of applications will drive up use on our networks, but are not going to necessarily be new devices on their network. They're tied into the smartphones and tablets that we already have. Implantable devices are another really interesting area, and also another area that I think has potential implications for privacy and also hacking. A couple of years ago, some white hat hackers showed that they could basically hijack an insulin pump from about half a mile away and deliver a lethal dose. At the same hacking conference, again, white hat hacking, it was shown that a heart valve, a pacemaker, could be turned into a system that delivered lethal voltage, basically killing a person, using the wireless communications that are embedded in these devices. Concern around this was so great that the former Vice President Dick Cheney in the United States, who had a pacemaker, his team disabled the wireless communications because they were afraid that somebody might be able to hack it. So there are huge potential healthcare benefits, but there are a lot of security areas that also need to be considered. The next area is ingestible devices. And what's happening here is that these devices are so tiny. This is a chip, and you can see it next to a little thumbtack pin. And they're getting smaller and smaller and smaller, and they're being embedded into pills that you then swallow. Proteus is one of the early companies in this area, and they already have pills that allow doctors to monitor, for instance, whether elderly patients have taken their appropriate dose of medication.
Forget the blue pill and the red pill. In a wild futuristic innovation, Motorola unveiled a new pill that, when swallowed, interacts with human stomach acid and emits an 18-bit signal from your body, making an entire person an authentication device. Dubbed the authentication vitamin, the pill has already been approved by the FDA and could interact with cell phones and other devices. Motorola also showed off an electronic tattoo fitted with circuits and an antenna. The same variety Google said it hopes to develop to replace traditional passwords in some cases. The neat human-machine inventions continue the craze for wearable computers, a hot topic at the D11 conference in California, where talk about Google Glass and a potential Apple Watch has led to questions about how widely such technology might be adopted.
As I said, some interesting implications here. The question, though, is how long do these devices stay in your body? You know, how many of them can you have in your body without having any kind of health effects? And what happens to the information? Is it secure? I'll take just a moment to also show you a detailed picture of this printable skin sensor. You know, when you start to think of the fact that you've got these skin sensors that you can literally print, perhaps with 3D printers, and you don't even need elastomer backing. You can literally use a rubber stamp to put this on a person, and it stays on for about 2 weeks until the process of skin exfoliation discards the sensor. These things are becoming cheaper and cheaper and more ubiquitous, and when you tie it in with something like an ingestible pill, it allows you to then, you know, communicate from the computer in the pill to your wireless skin patch, and then off to either a fixed or cellular network. There are wireless communications devices embedded in these sensors. These are new opportunities for services and also another driver of potential traffic on our networks. We've heard of the Internet of Things, and I'm sure many of you have seen this graph from Cisco where they're showing and predicting that by 2020 they're expecting 50 billion devices. Well, there are more than enough IP addresses with IPv6 to accommodate this. Many, many more devices. What other kinds of things might we expect to see? Home automation is one of the areas where there's a lot of innovation happening right now. And I divide these kinds of devices into two categories. The first are point devices that control different functions in your home, and the second are gateways. These are a couple of examples of point devices. I'm showing on the left side the Belkin Wemo, and it's a device that basically lets you plug into your wall socket, take your existing electrical devices, and control them remotely. Another example is LifeX light bulb that allows you to have all kinds of colored lights and do things like strobe and control individual light colors and control your lights remotely through a smartphone application. And the last is something quite interesting, which is open source hardware, the Arduino platform. And there are many different devices being assembled in this platform. Things like remote locks, lights, temperature sensors, even an artificial prosthesis, which I saw last week. One of the interesting things that I'm finding in these new technologies is that they're being funded on Kickstarter. You'll notice over here that LifeX has raised over $1 million on Kickstarter for this new application. This picture is the Ninja Sphere. This is one of the gateways that I've mentioned. And it has a number of communication protocols. It controls a lot of these different devices because you can imagine you have lots of devices in your home, and having different apps for every single one of them can be a bit cumbersome and not very easy to manage. So this type of gateway uses a number of different protocols: Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, and Zigbee. There are a couple of different home automation protocols. Zigbee is one of them, and Z-Wave or Z-Wave, as we would say here, is another. Competing protocols, they allow you to do all kinds of things like interface with your smartphone, being able to find where your smartphone is at, turn heaters on and off, control electricity usage in different appliances, look at temperature in your wine cooler, many different applications. There are telco opportunities in this. This is a slide that INET allow me to use. They announced a couple of weeks ago at another conference a prototype of some work that they're doing in the home automation space, something that they've been working on for a while now. And frankly, it's an interesting opportunity because we're seeing a convergence of the telco and electricity and gas and even insurance services by a number of players in the market. Having a device like a gateway that allows you to pull it together into a way that makes it really, really easy for consumers to use has a lot of opportunities. And it allows a telco to basically be the point of entry into a consumer's home and be their go-to provider for a range of services, not just telco services, but perhaps electricity services and a number of other things that might be layered over the top of that. There are also major advances happening in the automotive space. Google has been working with driverless cars for some number of years. We're seeing mobile operating systems completely integrated into cars. Android has a version, so does Apple. They called it CarPlay. And the automobile industry is making serious investment in this. One of the more interesting concepts is platooning robot cars. This is something that Dean Economou told me about. And this is just a little picture from a video from Volvo, where essentially you have a lead car that might be controlled by an expert driver, driving at very, very high speeds, maybe 150 kilometers an hour. And behind it, at very close distance, say maybe a meter or a couple meters apart, are automatically controlled cars in what looks like a car chain. And these are completely controlled on an automated basis. Let me show you a quick video of how this might work.
This is Future Car.
By the year 2030, we certainly can imagine automobiles that don't crash. And today, we have technologies that are clearly on the roadmap to that future. Collision avoidance systems, for example. We have sensors based on radar or LiDAR sensors that actually can detect whether there's an object up the road and give our drivers heads up, advance notice that there's an object coming. Not only can computers allow vehicles to essentially see and sense what's around them, but can process that information very quickly.
There is no question that there will be artificial vision of some form in vehicles in the future.
In order to achieve a crash-free world, our cars must be communicating with one another, all guided by the smart roadways they travel on. Already, there are telematic highways in Wales, and sensors are being used on roadways in smart corridors of Southern California.
Cars will be communicating their locations within a precision of less than a meter, and being able to communicate within milliseconds.
There are implications for our industry in this because there's going to be communications and control that is required for these networks. The question is, who are the companies that are going to take advantage of these opportunities? Will it be the automobile industry? Will it be the telecommunications industry? Will it be a new industry that arises just to do this? Sensor networks are another really interesting application with legs in the telecommunications space and opportunities for those of us in this industry. Here I'm showing a couple of sensor networks that I became aware of as part of the Australian Centre for Broadband Innovation review panel that I was on a few months back. In Tasmania, there's a project called Sense-T, and it's a collaboration between the Tassie government, UTAS, CSIRO, and IBM. And literally what they are trying to do is deploy a very wide range of sensors, including those that measure, soil moisture, humidity, even the heartbeats of oysters, looking for pollutants in waterways. and then combining this information with other data that's held in state and business databases, things like historical information as well as spatially, to be able to give a completely different view of the environment. Other work that's being done in Australia are many, many different sensor deployments for smart farms. And in the picture below, I'm showing a sensor, the orange thing, from a company called Taggle, which is based out of the ATP in Redfern. And if you look closely, you can see that there is an orange dongle on the cow's ear. These sensor networks will have to be deployed and controlled by someone. The question is, who's going to step in and take advantage of this opportunity? We're still in the very early days, but these are devices that will use communication networks and perhaps present brand new opportunities for companies in the telecommunication space. Drones are another area that are quite interesting. A few months ago, Amazon announced their Amazon Prime Air delivery system. And what they're envisioning is that they're going to be deploying packages, initially in the US, to customers' doorsteps within 30 minutes of a customer placing an order. In the literature that Amazon has published on this, they envision deploying these as early as next year in 2015, and their view is that these drones, delivery drones, will be as ubiquitous as mail trucks are. This is hugely disruptive for the mail and courier logistics industry, not to mention looking at airspace. Who's going to control these things? You know, there are communications capabilities that will need to be built into this. UAVs, which is the more formal term for drones, unmanned aerial vehicles, are also being very widely used in mining, in the mining sector, resources sector, and also for things like fire and other areas where it's not safe for a human to go. Also quite useful in things like, you know, perhaps a terrorist situation or a hostage situation where you really don't want to send any human, but you want to get some kind of surveillance. However, drones also have a downside. A few weeks ago in the UK, an ethical hacker deployed a drone called Snoopy that basically showed how easy it was to hack into a smartphone using wireless protocols. In our smartphones today, when we have Wi-Fi turned on, they're broadcasting for networks that they know and trust. So if you use a hotspot like Starbucks or McDonald's, it basically calls out, hey, Starbucks, are you there? McDonald's, are you there? Well, this researcher, designed a drone that allows you to mimic these networks and then get all kinds of personal information, even getting into your Facebook account. Huge implications here. Drones down under. Well, this is a picture from Sydney, as we can see, you know, one of the early commercial tests. One of the concerns here is that CASA simply does not have the resources to look at every single drone, and privacy implications are actually outside of its scope. It's not resourced up for it. I was describing my research to a friend a few weeks ago, and he told me about an incident that occurred on his property that I found quite shocking. He lives in an apartment complex in the North Shore of Sydney, and he's on the strata board. In early January, he and some of his neighbors noticed a couple of guys controlling a drone that was flying around between the buildings, had a camera on it, and was peering in through people's windows. They went to these guys and said, "What are you doing?" The guy said, "Oh, we're filming something for a school project," supposedly. They asked these guys to stop. They wouldn't stop. They took pictures and videos of what they were doing, including the license plate of the car that these people were in. They reported it to the police. The police came back and said, "I'm sorry, we'll take it to the prosecutor, but I don't think we're going to be able to do anything about this. Your property does not have a sign that says private property, no trespassing. Yes, you do have signs in the roadway saying, private roadway, only, registered vehicles allowed to park here, but there is no jurisdiction that allows us to go after these people. So the question is, if somebody put a ladder up to your window and you're on the 3rd story of an apartment complex and was peering in and taking pictures, would the police arrest them? Probably yes. But if they're out there with a drone doing the same thing but without the ladder, just using an unmanned aerial vehicle, there's no jurisdiction. There are huge privacy implications here. Well, there are other kinds of drones too. Facebook is reportedly in talks to acquire a drone maker called Titan Aerospace. And these drones they look like little planes. They're solar powered. They can fly for 5 years. And they're looking to circle parts of the planet where internet connections are not available, starting in Africa. Google has a similar project called Project Loon, where it's deploying balloons, initially in New Zealand, that again provide internet connections to areas that don't have them. They're bypassing the telecommunications networks, particularly in the case of Project Loon, where residents who want to take part in this trial have this special device. It communicates with the balloon. It uses ISM band frequency, and it's providing an internet service that is completely separate from today's telecommunications networks. It's a potential threat to the industry, and maybe even a signal that shows that these companies are becoming very much interested in the telecom space, but with an army of other things that are draw cards for consumers. Privacy. Well, we've all heard about data retention and the fact that, it's only metadata. You can't really do anything interesting with it. We're not really collecting information about it. Well, a couple of weeks ago, some researchers in Stanford University showed from an experiment that they did that you can derive a lot of information from metadata. Using about 500 participants over just a couple of month period and looking at the metadata, they were able to piece together things about people's medical histories, legal activities, and other information just putting this together. Imagine if you had years worth of data, what you can ascertain just using that information. And they did it by matching up phone numbers with publicly available databases and being able to figure out who you're calling, the kinds of companies that you're calling. NSA, well, so much has been said about NSA spying that I'm not going to dwell on it, but it's another major privacy concern. And interestingly, there was an article in Der Spiegel that pointed to a lot of what NSA is doing. One of the attack vectors that they use are error reports that come up, in this case from Microsoft, where literally they use that as the vector to get into your computer and get more information. And it's not just the government that's snooping on people, it's maybe even ourselves. There's an app that was launched just a little while ago called CrowdPilot that lets you, supposedly with permission of the people around you, record the conversations that you're having and have it broadcast live onto social media. You get to choose whether it's people in your Facebook circle, the general public, people that you hire to give you advice, and you're getting real-time feedback on your mobile phone telling you, how to interact in social situations. Even the trash cans are tracking you. This is out of London. There's a trash can company called Renew that basically has digital advertising as part of its recycling bin. And they deployed this technology called Renew Orb that was tracking MAC addresses from smartphones going nearby in an effort to start looking at personal advertising and how to best utilize its screen space. Encryption, no doubt, will be a default in the future. We're already seeing Google and Facebook and many other social media companies defaulting into encrypted mode, HTTPS. But mind you, they're just preventing everybody else from looking at the data. They're still using it for themselves. There are other applications that you can download yourself. This is an increasing area. Privacy, we've talked about Google Glass and surveillance. One of the things that I find really scary is something that Dr. Michio Kaku said in a talk that I recently listened to, where he's predicting that within 20 years, the same kinds of technology that we're seeing in Google Glass will be available in contact lenses. Today, we can tell if someone's wearing a device like Google Glass, but when someone actually has this kind of recording technology in contacts, you're going to have to be very, very close to that person to know that they're potentially recording what you're doing. Social networks. Well, a couple of scary trends happening here. I don't know how many of you are aware of it, but in late December, Google acquired a robotics company called Boston Dynamics. This company makes robots that I wish I had time to show you a video of, because these things are big, they're fast, they're scary, they're funded by DARPA, and they're designed for military applications. The question is, why does Google want a company like this? They've bought 7 other robotics companies over the last year. Just recently, they've acquired a company called DeepMind that has artificial intelligence capabilities. You start putting it together, and some of the commentators in the net are saying, are we going to see the rise of Skynet from the iconic Terminator movies? Well, I don't think Google would purposely do anything like that. I mean, nobody would want to design a network that would kill off humanity. It would destroy their revenue stream, if nothing else. But what happens when you take all of these ingredients that are brand new and you shake them together? It's hard to know exactly what's going to come out. Technology can be used to empower humanity or enslave humanity, and it's up to us to decide what we're going to do with it. So last thoughts for telcos. There are a lot of new devices. I see plenty of opportunities, but lots of threats, particularly from social media companies. Big data is an area where telcos do have an advantage. Lots of information passes through the telco networks. Right now, telcos have been using that data for their internal uses, but will telcos sell it to third parties? In the US, it's already happened. Apparently, Sprint sells data to the NSA, and the NSA basically complained about being overcharged. I think that this is something that is going to be a trend in the telco networks around the world, where big data becomes part of what they sell. Will it be anonymized? Will that be good enough? I don't know. So welcome to the future. I hope you've enjoyed the talk, and if you're interested in these kinds of subjects, I invite you to have a look at my blog. I'm publishing interviews, and I think you'll find the content really fascinating. Thank you very much.